Professor Dornan, you teach at Carleton, correct?
I do indeed.
And you were taught at Carleton as well?
I did. I took my undergraduate degree there.
So would it be fair to call that something of an endorsement?
Yes, as a matter of fact. Yeah, no, I have thoroughly enjoyed my time as an undergraduate. I did my first 2 years at the University of Toronto and then transferred to Carleton and did the 4-year Bachelor of Journalism, smashed into 2 years. But I had an absolutely terrific time. Yeah.
That's interesting, because you also, I'm not mistaken, you have a pretty long career in journalism as well, right? You know, there was the Journal, and if I'm not mistaken, the Ottawa Citizen.
Yes. But I did something that was that's unusual. I kind of worked in newspapers and then in radio while also working as an academic in the university. So basically, I started out. My first job was here in Edmonton at the Edmonton Journal when I was a student. And I liked it so much, I kept coming. I would work for like 8 months of the year as a student, and then come back for 4 months each year to work for the Edmonton Journal. We had a fabulous time. The newspaper had it was the height of the oil crazy money days. The newspaper was a thick thing, fat with advertising, and the newsroom had an enormous amount of money. Had a great esprit de corps. So I came back 3 summers over the span of 3 years working at the Journal. But then, I went on took a PhD. But I did the same thing. I would work for 8 months as a student, and then 4 months I would work in journalism, and I kept that up for. I worked at the Ottawa Citizen while I was a faculty member at Carleton for a while.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I am, but you were one of the principal writers for the Shattermere Report.
That's correct. Yes.
So, given just sort of, I see you sort of, gesticulating with pride about the thickness of the old paper, and in contrast to the report that was really still relatively recently, I gotta, just out of, if nothing else, curiosity, I have to know, what sort of advice has your approach with students changed at all, given sort of the glory days that you recall and the sort of assessment that you've written since?
Yes and no. I mean, the fundamental skills that a journalism degree will equip, a set of skills and understandings that a journalism degree will equip students with are eminently marketable and eminently transportable. They're still very much in demand. In fact, in many ways more so, because as the legacy media collapse, more and more institutions, agencies, organizations, from Amnesty International to the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, have to take on a communication function of their own, and need people with the type of skills that our degree is equipping our students. But by the same token, the circumstances that have imperiled the legacy media have also annihilated the old barriers to entrepreneurship and to ownership. So, it used to be, when I was your age, you couldn't just start up your own radio station. You couldn't start up your own television station. You couldn't create, a newspaper required a printing plant of $100 million. To operate a television station, you needed a license from the state. Now, you can create your own YouTube channel, you can podcast, you can find an information sort of market niche so that what's happening in some ways is actually exhilarating. You have this explosion of new forms, new genres of information content that simply were absent in the late 20th century, when the communication environment was dominated by the mass media and by omnibus publications like the Edmonton Journal.
So it sounds like, and correct me if I'm, but it sounds like by your assessment there are sort of 2 potential streams that the future of journalism will fall into. It's either the NGOs that you mentioned, or it'll be startups. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yes, I think so. And I think one of the examples I like is an outfit out of Britain called the Limping Chicken. And it's a purely digital publication, and it was created by a young British journalist by the name of Charlie Swinburne, who is deaf. And Swinburne realized there is no publication for the deaf community. And he got a small grant. He started this digital outfit. Now they don't need the grant money. It turns out there are all sorts of advertisers who are keen to reach the deaf community, from people who make fire alarms, smoke alarms for the deaf, to schools for the deaf, or theater companies for the deaf. And so it's a small operation. They have maybe 5 employees. They've got a larger penumbra of about 150 people to contribute to the publication. And they've moved into what was an absent information niche. There was no publication for the deaf. And they've brought a community together. They're providing a public service that didn't exist before. And they're making the world a better place as a consequence. That's the startup model that the new digital environment actually encourages.
That's interesting. So, sort of like when a super predator dies, the ecosystem starts to. Yeah,
exactly.
Interesting.
That's actually a very good metaphor.
Thanks, sir. So I think it's safe to assume you read the federal budget, yeah?
I did.
And if I'm not mistaken, it's what is it? 50 million over 5 years to what is it? Essential, small.
Underserved local community journalism. $10 million a year over 5 years is not a lot of money if you think of it in terms of post media, the big. But if you think about it in terms of how many, if you were employing people who made $50,000-$60,000 a year, how many journalists would that $10 million a year employ? So in that kind of small startup model, actually properly husbanded and properly deployed, that money actually might make a significant difference. The trick is that I don't think the federal government has any idea how to deploy that money. Who decides who gets it and for what purpose? And are we going to give it to individuals, or do they need to form themselves into community-oriented digital journalism sites, and then they could apply for money and support? That is not clear to us at all.
That's interesting. Just given the context of the report you authored, how do you see it fitting within the framework you laid out in Shattered Mirrors?
It's certainly an attempt on the part of the federal government to address a concern that the report highlighted, which is the the kind of information deficit that now haunts the local communities in particular. One of the examples we used with in the province of Saskatchewan, there is not a single full-time journalist assigned to cover the legislature. That's a profound and structural difference from and has potentially perilous consequences for how we understand our own government. They're trying to. They certainly are. You could argue that this is just gestural on the part of the government at this point, but they're making sort of noises that that they understand that lack of journalistic coverage of local communities is actually damaging to those communities and to the social fabric. But I don't think they really have a plan yet fully formulated that they don't really know what to do with it. And actually, my speculation is that they're really kind of waiting for their hand to be forced. That they're waiting for Post Media to go bankrupt, and then they will have to be galvanized into action, because we can't have a society in which there is no Edmonton Journal and there is no Montreal Gazette, and there is no Saskatoon Star Phoenix. So it does fit. The major recommendations of the report were that first of all, we do have an organization that operates coast to coast with a long and proud professional tradition in journalism, which is nationally and internationally respected, and it functions in both official languages, and it functions in communities all over the country, and it is the CBC. So one of the recommendations was redouble our support and emphasis on CBC journalism. But we don't want to put our eggs all in one basket. There are a lot of people who don't like the CBC, who see it as a kind of transmitter tower for some kind of squishy left of center sensibility.
Or even federally funded competitor.
So you wouldn't want to put all your eggs in one basket and into the public sector. You need a private sector counterweight and competitor. And fortunately, there is such an organization that, again, has a prouder and longer tradition than the CBC, also functions in both official languages, operates in communities across the country, and it's Canadian press. And so the idea was, okay, let's see if we can support the private sector operation, the CP and the CBC could compete with one another. And then the third leg of the tripod was to incentivize the startups, to put a little wind in the sails of people who have really ingenious ideas like the limping chicken, and see if we could get, let 1,000 flowers bloom, but let them be smaller niche publications.